Got members of the public, good morning. No mai haramai, welcome. So welcome to our Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting, today the 11th of October 2018. And we are starting, we've had a late start this morning, we've been doing some other business, but we're starting this morning at 11:15. So welcome to you all. We are streaming live, so to those who are watching our meeting this morning, no mai haramai, welcome to you from afar. Mobile phones, please, councillors, if you could just turn them off and store them away during the meeting, and we can take some breaks from time to time if there are urgent matters you want to clear off your phones. Apologies, please, this morning. I do have two from Councillor Maxwell, who is away on council business, Councillor Kumar as well. And yes, I've had another late one. Apologies from Mr. Phil Thomas. Those are the apologies, and I also have an apology for lateness for Eugene Berryman-Kemp. He's on some business as well, but will be late. He's meeting with the Minister of the Environment, I think. So could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Gould. Thank you, Mrs. Trumper. Thank you. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you, carried. Declarations of interest. Carl, thank you. Items of urgent items that are not on the agenda. Thank you. Councillor Gould.
Madam Chair, at the full council meeting last month, Councillor Sturt tabled the racing report, which is supposed to come to a committee meeting next month, and I don't see it on today's agenda. I didn't see it on Charles's agenda last week.
Yes, I understand there's an update coming in the O&M agenda, so that's when that one will come. Thank you for reminding us about that, Councillor Gould. Yes, Councillor Sturt.
Madam Chair, I was also going to raise that issue. Submissions close on the 19th of October, so I think the next O&M meeting is after that date. So I just wondered whether councillors, I know Her Worship the Mayor has made a submission supporting the Rotorua Racing Club. I have also made my own private submission, not only on the Rotorua Racing Club, but racing in general, because I have a vested interest, of course. But I think it would be timely that we do bat and go into bat for the Rotorua Racing Club from an economic development point of view, from Councillor Donaldson's portfolio, and that maybe the five of us, the committee chairs, the mayor and the deputy mayor and the CEO, if councillors are agreeable, I'm happy to, but I don't want us to miss the opportunity as a corporate body to back one of our major event providers who race 10 times a year in Rotorua and who have a major impact on our economy, that we miss that opportunity to make a submission on behalf of our community. So I'll leave that. I'd like to hear what the CEO's preferences, and then hear from Her Worship in terms of where she wants to lead this, because I think it's really important for our community. I would go into bat for any major organisation. I mean, we did the same if it was the Bay of Plenty Rugby Union. I'd want us to go into bat for that if it was mountain biking relocating to Cambridge or whatever. I think it's a very important issue for our community. And I notice our local MPs are also engaging on social media with me and others. So I'd be interested to hear what the CEO's response is, please.
Thank you, but I don't think it isn't an urgent item on the agenda today. It is coming up in the next O&M meeting. By that time, the submissions will have been closed anyway. So I think that it can wait until the O&M meeting, when a report, I understand, is coming. Is that correct?
Through the chair, if I can make one comment. I think Councillor Sturt is correct that the submissions actually do get closed prior to the O&M meeting date, as far as I can. I'm just trying to think through the dates, but I'm fairly sure that that's correct. The option I think that you're asking for, and it's something that if the council wished we could certainly undertake, is that the mayor has already made a letter available through to the club that could be used as the basis of a submission quite easily on behalf of council, if that's what you were looking to achieve.
I want to hear what other colleagues have got to say, but I would like to use that as the basis for submission, and if all members could be emailed with what is involved, what is included in your support for the club, and if that's the basis for a submission, I'm more than happy to acquiesce. But if it's not in depth enough, I'll certainly be able to see by what's written there. I mean, if it's just a letter of support for the club, I mean, there's more to it than just supporting them. I mean, there's many other issues facing Rotorua from an economic development point of view that I think need to be traversed. I mean, we're going to get one shot at it, because if they take the licence away, it takes away the Rotorua Racing Club, the Tamarunuri Jockey Club, and the Bay of Plenty Hunt Club out of the Rotorua, and we'd have to race in Tauranga. So I don't want that eventuality.
I'll go to Her Worship and then Councillor Kent. Yes, Your Worship.
I'm very happy that the letter come out with the minutes, a copy of the letter with the minutes of this meeting, so that councillors can see. It was a letter in support of the Rotorua Racing Club. It was not a submission climbing into the future of racing New Zealand. So I was under no instruction to do that by council, and so I was very careful that it was a letter of support for a very valuable club.
Thank you. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd just like to make the point, I think I made it last time, in the what has been suggested in the paper that people are supposed to submit on, I don't believe there's any mention of any racing club closing. It is whether tracks should continue to be used or not. It is not closing down clubs, so please get that straight. But like Councillor Sturt, I would certainly be interested in being involved.
Thank you.
So if I can circulate, the letter does talk about the economic contribution that the club and the activity actually makes to Rotorua. So that is a foundation side of it. But it also goes on to talk about the strategic direction that the actually club has in place and actually supports that. So if you're open to the suggestion that we circulate the letter to you as the basis of a submission and prepare a submission on the assumption and waiting to hear from you if there are any additional changes that you'd see needed to it.
Thank you very much for that. Thank you. Oh, yes, Councillor Donaldson.
Yeah, I just wonder, as part of completing that submission, whether we could talk to some of the people over at Rotorua Economic Development Limited, just to get some additional input into the argument that we put forward.
Yes. Thank you, Councillor Donaldson.
The Business Development Manager, Rebecca Wright, would be able to help with that.
Thank you. Good point. Thank you. So, our item number 4, the minutes, confirmation of our minutes, the minutes of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting held on the 9th of August 2018. May I have a mover and a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Gould. Thank you, Councillor Kent. Are there any corrections or amendments to the minutes? Carl, thank you very much. I'll put that motion that the minutes of the Strategy, Policy and Finance Committee meeting held on the 9th of August 2018 be confirmed as a true and correct record. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you. Staff reports. Yes, Your Worship.
Wondered in relation to the minutes, it was recorded that Councillor Trevor Maxwell was away on council business. Look, I'm aware of some conversations in the community. He's leading a delegation to Beppu in preparation for the Rugby World Cup and at the invitation of Beppu, and that is very appropriate as our ambassador, and it certainly didn't require me to go as well. So I'm very happy that he's there, and that should be on the public record.
I think we do have him down as being on council business.
Yes, but people are wondering if it really is council business, and I want to put it on the record that it certainly is in his role as cultural ambassador.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Page 15. Thank you. This is the recommendation 1. The Men's Shed Rotorua, the new lease on Perarika Street Reserve. Could I call for a mover and a seconder, please, to receive the report? Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Thank you, Your Worship. It's been moved and seconded that the report, Men's Shed, Rotorua, the new lease on Pirarika Street Reserve be received. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you, carried. Good morning. Morena Korua.
Kia ora, Madam Chair and councillors and board members. Look, a couple of reasonably straightforward papers, I think, coming through, which I'll ask Rob to actually take you through the detail and just address any questions.
Thank you, Henry. Kia ora koutou, everybody. So the first one, the Men's Shed on Pirarika Street. The Men's Shed is a charitable organisation. I think as they describe it, where a bunch of blokes get together and play with wood and tools and do a bit of bonding, which is actually quite good in later life, so I'm told. I'll get there eventually. And the situation is that their current property at 16 Tenai Road, they need to vacate that, so they've asked for assistance from the council to look for a site. We have talked through a couple of sites with them and agreed on a site at Pirarika Street Reserve, which also houses the Rotary Anglers Association, the Model Aircraft Club, the Model Railway Club, Wood Turning Club, and also the Scout Hall, which is slightly down the road. That's a gifted reserve, so we've taken that through the Ngāti Whakaui Gifted Reserves Protocol Committee, and they've agreed to support a lease for a new site there. The Men's Shed have asked for 20 years, which allows them then to have security for funding applications. Leases over 10 years are required to come to council, so that's why it's come before you. The agenda item shows the site where they've requested they have an area, and it would be a simple standard lease that would fit in with the other community activity leases that would occur on that site. So happy to take any questions on that.
Thank you. Yes, Your Worship, thank you.
Yes, Rob, just clarify, they're looking at a new building, aren't they, in the end?
That's correct. There was an intention they were possibly going to get a bit of the Boys High relocated building, but at the stage they're looking at funding for a new building. They've also asked just that the site's big enough to have a couple of small containers, some of the shorter containers, that might be able to store their wood supplies. So it's been cleared with.
And could I just add, thank you for helping them find a site, and that it's gone through gifted reserves. And it's more than just a men's club. Actually, this group do contribute a lot. They've built the crosses for the Armistice Day, and they do a lot of little jobs that really make our community feel proud. And so it's really nice that we've got them a footprint for a new space. Thank you for that.
Councillor Stewart.
I move the motion simply because it fits in with our sport and recreation strategy of great places to play and to be involved with. So just one other question. The lease of 20 years, gentlemen, that fits in with the other leases that are down there? They've got similar type leases? And I'm pleased also that, number one, as Her Worship has said, we've gone through the protocol committee, of which I'm a member as well, but also you've spoken to the other occupants there and they're fully agreeant. But I just wondered whether it fitted in with those other leases.
The other leases are of a similar time frame. In fact, I think they might be 25 years. I'm not sure when they terminate, but it's the same sort of terms and conditions that the other ones have, a slightly reduced time.
Councillor Gould and Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just point of clarification, please, Rob. Is the site next to St John's, or is the site next to the Girl Guides Hall, which is right next door to the Rotorua Boys High School?
The site, it's basically, it's directly behind the Model Railway Club, so it's slightly further towards the old Taupo Road side of St John's, but it's not as far down as the high school.
Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to add congratulations to staff for finding a solution. This has been sitting out there for some time now to look for a new home for men's shed. And men's sheds perform a very important role, not only, as her worship has said, making a contribution to community projects, but I can't think of a better milestone than getting a solution for men's shed in Mental Health Awareness Week, because loneliness with the older guys out there, and I'm sure ladies with their tools will be welcome as well, is definitely an issue, and men's shed are just great in that respect, so it's fantastic.
Thank you very much, Councillor Donaldson, and I do agree they make a great contribution to the community. Now, it's been moved and seconded, so no further discussion, so I'll put that motion that the committee recommends to Council to approve the new lease to the men's shed, Rotorua, on Perarika Street Reserve for a period of 20 years. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you, carried. Recommendation 2, Rotorua Lakes Water Sports Trust, lease extension on the Lakefront Reserve. May I have a mover and a seconder, please, to receive the report? Thank you, Councillor Bentley. Thank you, Councillor Gould. I'll put that, yes, that the report be received. I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you, carried. Henry, you're still there? Oh, thank you, Rob.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Carol, if you could just perhaps bring up those images. So the Rotorua Lakes Water Sports Trust, if you just hit the next button, Carol, thanks, is the slide there shows basically the lakefront boat ramp. On the bottom right of the picture is the sound shell, and the top left was the Water Sports Trust, and that's an image of the building. So that's a piece of council reserve that we lease to the Water Sports Trust. They own the building. Their lease expired just earlier this year. They've been going through a process to do some fundraising for some renovations. They want to actually improve the upstairs area of the building, add on some more space, which is actually going to be a training area to assist the clubs that are part of the Water Sports Trust. This is actually quite similar to a sports hub style of model. It's got 5 clubs involved with it. Well, the Coast Guard not being a club, but the Rowing Club, Yacht Club, the Pleasure Boat and Fishing Club, and the Young Mariners all operate out of that same space. The situation is that to do the extra work that they want to do, they're going to need to raise some funding, and to raise the funding they need some security, so they've asked for a 20-year lease. Again, this is a gifted reserve, so it's been before the Ngāti Whakāui Gifted Reserves Protocol Committee, who have supported the extension of, the renewal of a lease out for a 20-year period. There's no impact of this on the lakefront development, which is all located more to the east, and it's actually a very key sort of activation area that we'd like to see in terms of the recreational activation of that part of the lakefront. So it's been integral in the thinking around how that lakefront's going to look in the future. So the situation is that we support that they have a 20-year lease period. We actually want to make sure that they stay a very sustainable and vibrant group of clubs. So we would actually put something in the lease to make sure that they are reporting back on their levels of activation and how much they're doing there, because ultimately that is an area of the lake we want to become even more recreationally active. So fairly straightforward process there, and again, happy to take any questions on that one.
Yes, thank you. Yes, we will have some questions. Councillor Stewart.
Madam Chair, I just want to be absolutely sure that in view of what was released a fortnight ago with regard to the exciting lakefront development proposals, that there is no conflict with the design concepts, that this fits in perfectly with what is proposed down there in line, in view of the fact that the sound shell comes down, that a new facility is going to be built close by, because I don't want in 5 years' time to say, oh well, these things should have been considered prior to the lease being renewed. So I just want to have that assurance from Rob and staff that there is no conflict in the design concepts that were presented last week. Thank you.
Yep, certainly I can give you that assurance, Councillor. The whole design has, for the lakefront, has had a clear understanding of the activity zones in it. This western end of the design, even with relocating the waka, the Te Arawa waka to that end. Also, we've recognised that waka ama is a significant opportunity to grow on Lake Rotorua and also at this end of the development. So, and the spill round into Ahinimutu as well, activities in that area that could potentially future take people to a slightly different way to Ahinimutu is something that's all being considered. And just as something I probably should have noted too is that the Ahinimutu Marae Committee have been involved in this process and have supported the extension of the lease as well.
Councillor Tapsell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. The question I had was actually around the township management reserves. Was that correct? Township reserves management plan, just to ensure, because I know that it allows for it within there, but I'm just questioning about the accommodation side and what they propose to do with the upgrade. I'm just not too sure how common it is for us to be supporting accommodation on a reserve. I do totally support this though, and I think it's wonderful that we actually have 6 clubs within that building, so completely tautoko supporting them within the whole concept of developing the lakefront.
Thank you, Councillor. That's actually a very good question, and it's something that I just wanted to confirm this morning with the committee. When I wrote this report, their original intention was to try and have some sort of bunk room up there. They've since actually decided that that's not the best use of that space. They want to actually have a big open space in there, and they need to get the rowing club erg machines better set out. So the intention for the extension is no longer in that accommodation area. It's around actually making the space more functional for the clubs that use the space.
Thank you, Councillor Kent, then Councillor Gould.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to move the extension to the lease.
Thank you. Councillor Gould.
Madam Chair, I'm happy to second it, but I've got a question concerning page 21, 7.1. There are no financial cost implications in the decision for council. With all lease arrangements with property, there is a legal requirement with legal costs. Am I correct in saying that the legal costs for this council will be very minimum in arranging a renewal of the lease for 20 years?
Yes, that's correct, Councillor. We do that in-house. All these leases on our reserves we prepare in-house, so there will be no external cost.
Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, my question was regarding the proposed alteration. So it sounds like it's still on the plan, but just for a different purpose. And looking at the picture that just vanished up there of the roof line, I take it that's a separate issue to the lease. Like, I'm supportive of the lease, but the next picture, Carol? Yeah. So is that going to change the view shaft at all, the proposed alteration, and would that go out for consultation as part of a building consent?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. Certainly any alteration like that would require a building consent. From what I understand, just looking at that picture, it's a slight extension. In fact, from this angle, I don't even think you'd see it. It's sort of in the very back. It's on the left-hand side, and it's actually on the lake side. It sort of pushes out that way. The building has actually been sort of patched together from 3 or 4 buildings, and the intention in speaking to the committee members today is that it's actually to sort of make the building look better and push they've got some leaky problems, and so they need to do some sort of major repairs up there in the process. Just so it'll actually sort of push away on the opposite side of the picture to the way you're looking at it there.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy with that. Happy to support.
Mr. Berryman-Kemp.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And firstly, apologies to you and to the committee for lateness. Also, apologies for Gina Mohi. We've both been involved in a Te Arawa climate change meeting with Minister Shaw, which has gone a bit longer than it should have. So apologies for lateness. Thank you for your report. My question actually leads on from Councillor Sturt's in that actually, oh, sorry, if we could go back to the map, please. My understanding of the lakefront, of the proposed lakefront development, is the approximate location of the whare waka is somewhere around where the sound shell is right now. Is that correct? Okay. Thank you for that confirmation, because, and I do tautoko the proposal. Just to inform the committee, I know there's been some very preliminary discussions about Waka Ama also potentially joining on to that facility, because it's a fantastic facility. The clubs and the facility will have to make that choice. But what I wanted to note was that if the whare waka is at that end and the Waka Ama facilities are at that end, actually I think that this lease supports and reinforces the lakefront development, with the western end of the lakefront becoming a real non-motorised paddle sport hub. So certainly quite keen for that. And so my question is, I assume that there's nothing within the extension of this lease that would restrict the expansion of that to more paddle users.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Camp. Correct. Yeah, your assumption is correct. I mean, the Water Sports Trust currently work with Waka Ama occasionally in terms of a facility that they can have events out of. You know, Waka Ama generally needs quite a bit of space. When they turn up with the waka, they need a fair bit of room, and that's one of the issues. So the extension of that lease is just a ground lease over the area. There's still plenty of room to use any grass space, and hopefully with the development there will be more space to help those paddle sport events.
Councillor Hunt.
Thank you. Mine's more a design issue, really. And while we don't have a design guide, we do have a wood first policy. And considering they're needing to address leaky issues as well as the footprint, in your discussions, are you able to raise questions around what the design will look like? I mean, it's got a pretty nautical theme at the moment, which is obviously fitting on a waterfront. However, we're also doing a major development, and it would be nice to know that what they do is actually in harmony with the general feeling and aesthetics of what is proposed. So could those conversations be had, please, with the trust?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Yeah, we can have those conversations with the trust. I mean, I think the alteration is actually, in fact, that image might show it even better. You'll see that there's a very sort of on the gable line that's facing the lake on the left-hand side. There's a funny little roof bit happening in there. I think it's actually a tack on to that gable that's running parallel to the lake, and to just fill in that little hole. So it's a minor bit, but we'll certainly have those discussions with them.
Thank you. Rob, can you tell me, I just want to ask about the parking, because, I mean, they don't have activities there all the time, but sometimes when I walk down Ariari Tarangi Street, there's there's parking everywhere, and I'm just wondering, is it basically wherever you can get a park, you park there if there's an activity on? Is it going to be still like that? Because that's how it is at present.
It is, under the new lakefront development plan, going to change down there reasonably significantly. A lot of the parking will be pulled away from the lakefront. There will still need to be access, for Waka Ama and everyone else to get down there, the yachts and things like that, and to be able to unload. There needs to be access for Coast Guard. Clearly, they will require to get in and out of there at haste if necessary. So it's part of that whole development that we're looking at, and I don't see that there's any more parking that's going to be there. In fact, I think there will be less.
Thank you. It's really about mostly the trailers. That's the big issue when I go down there.
Yep.
And thank you. But thank you very much. Well, I'm going to put that. We did have a mover and a seconder. It's been moved by Councillor Kent, seconded by Councillor Stewart. that the committee recommends to council to extend the lease to the Rotorua Lakes Water Sports Trust on lakefront reserves for a period of 20 years from the 1st of August 2018. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you, carried. Recommendation 3. So, excuse me, boundary, point of supply, that's in brackets, backflow prevention. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please, to receive the report? Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Donaldson. Thank you, Councillor Gould. That the report boundary, point of supply, backflow prevention be received. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Thank you, carried. Morning, Stavros.
Morena, Madam Chair. Morena, elected members. I'll leave the report, take the report as read. Just would like to bring to the attention of elected members and committee members that this proposal here is just one of a package of proposals that reinforces our primary responsibility to ensure the quality and the appropriateness of water supply. As you know, our potable water supply is permanently chlorinated with the completion of the Mamaku supply zone. By the end of this month, all our supplies will be protected through UV treatments. And of course, you are investing a significant amount of money every year into the reactive, proactive, and asset management of the network to ensure the water quality meets standards. One of the requirements we have as a water supplying authority is to continuously evaluate potential risks to the water supply, and when we identify a risk, to identify an action plan to mitigate that risk. The risk that this proposal attempts to address is that in certain premises, especially industrial and commercial premises, the possibility exists where siphoning of water aisle pressure differentiation between the main supply system and inside those facilities may cause a reversal of flow. And while we've got chlorine and UV treatment in the system, those interventions do not address toxicity or acidity in the water. So the boundary backflow prevention are important devices to make sure that we have confidence that the possibility of backflowing into the main water supply and thus contaminating the potable water it's reduced. Historically, this council has been installing backflow boundary prevention devices. However, it appears that over the years that took place in the absence of a consistent policy, the information related to those in devices is a bit sketchy at the moment. The annual testing has not been conducted regularly, and therefore this policy it's an effort to ensure that there is a council-approved policy and the process and the funding and revenue mechanism to support it. So therefore, recommendation is for that policy to be approved by the committee, and I'm happy to take any questions on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. Stavros, I'm right in thinking, I believe, that these backflow prevention devices, the majority of them cost between $5 and $40. And we're basically talking about a brass tube with a steel ball bearing and a spring inside it. Requiring them to be fitted, I don't have an issue with. However, I do have an issue with bureaucracy gone stark raving mad if this council has got to go out and annually test every single one that fits, because that is absolutely ludicrous. The lifespan of those things, I mean, if they were tested once in 5 years, would be reasonable, I think. But I also raised the issue that if the property owner has paid for it, the council doesn't own it, and Section 69ZZZ only requires annual inspections of backflow preventers that are installed by a network supplier. So if the property owner has installed it, no annual inspection is required. Can you comment, please?
Councillor Kent, I think obviously you are quite right in terms of a balanced approach to that. However, the devices are there for a purpose. And simply for us as water supplying authority relying on the diligence and the discipline and the ability of a property owner who owns that device to test it annually, I simply think that it will not stand in an inquiry where the water supply has been contaminated and the council has defended itself and says, well, we relied on the property owner to do the testing. It might be a simple, quick way to do it annually. It might not be. The point is that our policy should require, our recommendations, our policy requires us as a water supply authority to ensure that these devices are functional and fit for purpose, and where they are not, we take the appropriate action. It may be a very simple process. In some cases, we might require a more complicated process. So we have to operate in that spectrum, and that's the nature of the policy, Councillor Kent.
Yes, Councillor Kent, please.
Thank you. But Stavros, in your report here, we're looking at fewer than 5 properties requiring an extensive backflow prevention device. I can understand those being annually tested and have no issue with that. I'm talking about all these other properties that are installing a $5 device and you want to bill them for testing it annually. That is ludicrous.
Thank you. Yes, Your Worship.
This has become a very big issue that I don't think this council's being aberrant about at all after the Havelock North drinking water inquiry. So there is a water regulator being mooted, and this is just going to be a standard of compliance that they're going to expect right across the country. And I think when you see what happened in Havelock, we had to learn from the recommendations of the inquiry about what we need to do. And even if we think it's overreaching, there's going to be even more regulations put upon us to make sure that people have safe drinking water. And I think this is something we have to go along with. I wouldn't rest easy with an outbreak of Guillain-Barré or CIDP from drinking water contamination in our community.
I'll come back to you, Councillor Kent. Mr. Berriman-Kemp.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your reports, Stavros. Point 5.3 on page 28, just in terms of the cost estimates and the estimated numbers. My question is, out of those estimated numbers, do you have any idea or indication as to where Marae would sit within those? Because, again, one of the things that I guess I'm concerned about, particularly with the cost ranges that are there, because the recommendation is that the property owner has to pay in full, for Marae in particular, which I assume will need these devices, that could be quite a large bill. So can you give me some clarity as to where you think Marae might sit on that table in terms of size? Please.
Two things. If you, I think the Marae will be fitting into the 15 to 20 millimeter water supply. But I think if you go back to, to background as to what we're trying to prevent here is that, issues such as, compressed air, antifreeze, caustic soda and things like that, that, acidic or toxic, in the system, I would imagine Marae would be of a lower, concern because basically the processed food, and which is no different to a kitchen, area. So I would not, without totally committing to it until you do the testing and assessment, obviously I cannot, fully confirm it. But I imagine it'll be on the lower risk priority for us.
Councillor Gould, then Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to move 2 and 3. But I've got a question on page 26 to recover the cost of maintenance. When you got annual, which is 12 months, and you've got an issue, is it a case of testing earlier than 12 months or doing it on a more regular basis if there is an issue with the backflow?
Can I go back to my earlier comment, Councillor Gould. The comment I made to Councillor Keynes, I recognise and appreciate the concern about how much inspection we need to do, for some simple devices. I think it's incumbent upon us as a water supply authority to identify and establish what needs to happen and when needs to happen to ensure an outcome. And the outcome is water quality for the consumers. If in some areas we need to do testing more regularly than 12 months, we will have to do it. I don't think there is any absolute prescriptive approach to that. What we are saying here, we're gradually identifying a risk. We're proposing a system to manage that risk, and that system needs to be managed consistent with the outcome we expect to achieve.
Question. Is some of the properties owned by the Rotorua Lakes Council, is that correct or not correct? The properties with the water up?
It might be. I don't have the details in my head.
Councillor.
Madam Chair, I've got no problem with this. I think it's a matter of risk mitigation, and I just want to know where the 605 properties lie. Are they mainly in the rural areas? Because I remember when we had backflow, in conjunction with backflow restrictors, with backflows, we had restrictors valves put on rural schemes because you were allocated a certain amount of water in terms of volume on your acreage, and many of those were tampered with, where screwdrivers were put in and increased volumes were, pretty rough in terms of the volumes that were going through those particular schemes. So I just wondered, are they mainly rural? Is the risk higher in the rural? I've already heard you say that Marae are a low risk, so obviously they're not going to be involved. But I'm trying to get a handle on who do I tell in the community that you're going to have imposed upon you a backflow restrictor. So I just wonder how this is going to be handled, because I don't want a hell of a lot of conflict out there. I see the need for them, but I also, we're giving an open checkbook to you to go around the district and put these in. I just want to know, what sort of areas.
I think the locations are mixes depending on the use. More than happy to compile a schedule of likely areas. What I would like to advise elected members is that this council has already installed somewhere in the region between 2,000 and 2,800 backflow preventions historically. The problem that we have is that the records, the systematic approach, and testing has been insufficient to give me comfort and confidence as a GM of infrastructure that I have that risk under control. I estimate to be an additional 600 properties that will require that. I can classify them and provide you some indication where they are. And that's my recommendation.
Councillor Hunt.
My reading is under the building warrant of fitness, any non-residential building has to have an annual check anyway, and I'm just wondering, so we're already going to these properties, and part of it is looking for backflow prevention devices. My question is, once you've understood the extent of the work, will you work it in with the current building WAF cycle, or will you establish a specific target to get this work up and running, and then once it's all done, then let the natural cycle of building warrant of fitnesses, because that will give the community some idea of whether they'll know when their building WAF's due, and they'll know when they ought to have things installed by.
Thank you, Councillor Han. Yes, the approach, obviously, we just have to make every effort to synchronize, operations and activities in a way that achieves synergies of scale. Having agreed to this policy, obviously, we are going away with our colleagues in the other departments to make sure that we have a synchronicity in what we do, so can give consistency of advice, to all the residents.
Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you. I don't have issues with commercial operations, larger operations, where there's an unknown problem. The issue I have is annual testing. for a device that's probably got a lifespan of 30 years. These things obviously have a rated device. You've got 2,800 already installed. Are you testing those annually? No. So why are you going to implement annual testing for everyone else?
Because, Councillor Kent, if you asked me, in the context of your responsibilities as a risk owner for this organization, this community, Mr. Michael, do you have confidence that you've got this risk under control? I will tell you, I don't at the moment.
Okay. So instead of actually annually testing, going around to every single one of these, what's going to be, 3,500 devices and testing them annually, wouldn't it actually be more economical for this council just to replace them all every 3 years? Or 5 years? Or whatever the reasonable life expectancy is? Because it will be quicker to replace one than just do the testing on it, because you've got to do exactly the same process. You've got to disconnect one side or the other, measure the pressure, and see what's happening. That's the same as actually changing the whole device.
Look, all these are valid points. The point I'm making here is that because of historical lack of information, I cannot give you a statistical assessment as to what it is worth doing regularly as a testing versus changing on a life cycle basis that will be more cost effective. Having agreed to this policy, it will allow me and my team to go away and consolidate that information and extract evidence-based approaches to the future management. And I don't disagree with what you say. The question is that I do not have the information and the data to give you a solid answer at this point in time until you agree to this policy.
Then should we not actually have that information before we determine a policy?
Thank you. You'd like to comment?
If I can help. One thing that I think if you look at the policy is clear that it is moderate and high risk connections. That's really the key focus. And I think for the council, the clear concern that's been highlighted is the potential where an activity, a commercial activity, connects directly into our water supply network, and they do so in a way where it could result in reverse contamination of that water supply network. So the policy is basically saying that we need to formalise the understandings that exist or expectations that exist, and those expectations are around, firstly, the installation of devices that would prevent an occurrence occurring, and then secondly, and I think it's also important to stress that we're not dealing, and this policy is not dealing with low risk situations. It's dealing with moderate and high risk connections where there is a moderate or high risk of, if the backflow device failed, of contamination of the water supply network. And fundamentally, I think that's the thrust of this policy. It's actually saying we need to move to consolidate and be clear about the expectations. There needs to be installation of devices, and secondly, there needs to be testing of those devices. I think Mr. Michael is saying at the moment that that's the first step. The next stage will be what is actually adequate with respect to inspection to ensure the devices are actually able to be inspected in a way or in a regime that allows satisfaction. Yes, we are doing things at a point which is realistic. It's actually a prudent approach, not something that is unnecessary. And I think that's the next stage that we do need to look at. But the first stage is actually putting in really the expectations that need to exist.
Thank you. Councillor Hunt. Oh, sorry, thank you. Councillor Donaldson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to second Councillor Gould's 2 and 3. I had a plumber working for me recently, and he looked at some new fittings that I'd just recently purchased to be installed in my property, and he said, "Where did you buy this rubbish?" So his professional view, and he's been in the business as a plumber and drain layer for well over 30 years, is that there is a wide variance in the quality of fittings that are on the market, out there, and so I was off to get a different one from a different place. But the CE has highlighted the fact of high and moderate risk, and I go back to the workshops that we've held where we as governments are responsible, not liable like the CE. If we are blind to risk or we turn a blind eye to risk. And so for me, I think this is wise policy to put in place, and we leave it with the infrastructure manager to work out the most cost-effective way of implementing the policy so that it's least cost to the property owners and also least cost to council. But I'm in support.
Thank you. Mrs. Trumper?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just a little concerned. Look, I support this obviously because, backflow, as Her Worship says, it is quite scary. But what I'm more nervous about is we're actually passing a recommendation that we actually don't know the effect of to which businesses. And there are a number of businesses out there, both rural and urban, that need to, we should really have an identification that it is a number of properties and what the effects are, because as it stands now, we're saying, well, yes, we approve this, but we don't actually know which commercial entities are being affected. And I'm just wondering if there was a list of them or when the survey was actually done, and so that we can actually have a full report.
Madam Chair, if you look into the funding, what you're saying is that for the remainder of this financial year in 1819, that investigation will take place. This will not take effect until 1920 year for the funding. So what you're saying that this policy will allow us to start doing the investigation and the assessment, and if the committee wants us to report back in a few months' time to say their investigation and assessment identify all these properties, then happy to do that. Or we can put it on the website, or we can put it into sort of visible place. However, I would suggest that an evidence-based assessment which indicates a level of medium to high risk, it's a responsibility we have to undertake.
Yeah, yes, Your Worship. Then Councillor Stewart.
Commend, because if you look at 8.2, it's called a proposed policy at this stage. So I would suggest and recommend that once you have done the assessment, the inspection and the identification and the installation of devices for those that have high or medium risk, then it may be time to report to us so that we just have a level of comfort on how much work is around this and probably finalise the next stage of the policy. It's almost a two-stage approach, supporting the policy in principle, but having a report back once you've done the identification and the installation of those at medium and high risk. Is that a sensible way forward? Because it's a very small policy.
Look, if I can through the chair, look, this is a first principle policy basically that says, are you prepared if there was a significant cost involved? Now, I'm not saying there is, but are you prepared to say you will put at risk the water supply network by not inspecting backflow devices? Now, fundamentally, if your answer is no to that, then you need to pass the policy. I very clearly hear from you that you are concerned, having said that, though, as to the potential cost and effect on this. Now, what we will do is that under the umbrella of this policy, we will come back to you and we will report back to you the inspection regime that's been proposed and identified, the mechanisms of it and the costs and so on, to ensure absolute transparency that a prudent and efficient system has actually been implemented. But that should be your understanding and expectation that that's exactly what we will do, and we'll report back to you to ensure that that's what we've actually done. But what we need, though, is the policy and put as the first stage of this, if you like.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. And I don't think I've heard anybody disagree with the fact that this is the first part of the policy. Yes, Councillor Stewart?
I support what Mrs. Trumper was saying, and I think the response from Stavros is appropriate because he's trying to mitigate risk. During the Havelock North inquiry, what became so apparent was the lack of testing. And I certainly don't want to sit around this table and have on my conscience what the District Council in Hastings had to have on its conscience with the deaths of people attributed to the fact that they had not been adequately tested in terms of the water. So I hear your plea, Stavros, that you can't put your hand on your heart to say that all the risks to our water supplies aren't being mitigated. So I think this is a moderate reaction, Madam Chair, to an issue that the engineer has come to us with to say that he needs to do some work. And I hear the plea from Her Worship stating that he will come back, and the assurance from the Chief Executive Officer and Stavros that he will do that very thing. So I implore my colleagues to support the recommendations on the understanding that we'll get the reports back, and otherwise I wouldn't support it if we didn't.
Thank you. And finally, yes, that Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As the chairman of a water supply company, I am fully aware of the risks involved and the processes involved. And having just fitted 2 backflow prevention devices on my own property, I'm just as familiar with the plumbing involved. The issue I have is one of annual testing, because I believe that is stupidity. If a reasonable quality device is installed, it's going to last a minimum of 5 years. To insist that all these properties are tested annually is going to involve another staff member. That is ludicrous. A backflow prevention device would not remotely have stopped one case in the Hawke's Bay problem. Not one. Because the contamination was at the point of source. So a backflow prevention device isn't going to stop that. All a backflow prevention device says is if your property is higher than the pumping station, for example, and the pumping station fails or goes off, water flows downhill. That's all a backflow prevention device does. It stops it going back into the system. Now, these devices, as I say, they're brass, stainless steel, and a strong spring. They don't just break. They take years to degrade, and probably degrade more if you've got chlorine in the water. But it's the sort of thing that 5 years is quite adequate to test. However, I don't want to put this thing on hold. I would like to propose an amendment. I would like to just delete one word, and that is annual, with the cost of testing being funded, which then gives council the opportunity to investigate further whether testing is required on an annual basis or not, but gives them the flexibility to do so if required, or not to do so if required.
With the cost of testing, yes. I think we can remove annual, because if you're going to come up with an option, you're going to come back with a report, you'll either have annual or you'll have...
It can become a 4 times a year testing.
Yes. Yes, I'll speak against that.
Thank you. You want to move an amendment to that, do you?
I'm happy to move the amendment that we remove the word annual and let's put it to the vote.
Thank you.
I wish to speak against it.
Thank you. Right. Well, yes, Your Worship.
Yes. Look, I think
we did get a seconder for that.
No. You've already got a mover and a seconder for 3.
Oh, for 3,
for 2
yes.
and 3, you will have to put that one.
back to
If it is lost,
Put
unless
them-
you've got agreement, if one of those mover and seconders want to remove it, then
So I have to put the amendment first rather than the... Yeah. Okay, so, well, thank you. The discussion on the amendment. Thank you, which is you. Yes? That's right. Yeah, we'll discuss the amendment. I'll put the amendment and then I'll come back to the main one. So yes, so we'll take the discussion on the amendment. It's been moved and seconded. It did by Councillor Kent, obviously, and Councillor Stewart seconded it, so we'll have some discussion on the amendment. Thank you.
That's what I wanted to say.
As it would be in a technical issue and technical matter, Stavros, it would be better. It would be good to have your comments at this stage as well, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I note and recognise the comments, made by some councillors. I think it seems to me that the issue about the annual testing or not revolves around, is that a cost that's necessary to be incurred, or not. However, my recommendation to this committee is that there's no point of having any system. There's no system that's either nature-made or man-made that is fail-proof. And unless you have a testing regime, you cannot prove that the system has not failed. Now, the frequency of that testing, it's used, as an annual basis because we believe on the evidence, on the knowledge you've got at the moment annually, it's a reasonable, frequency. It is, if you remove that annual testing, it is hard. It is possible that some areas might be tested a number of times through the year. I'm quite comfortable with that, but I think that will defeat your primary concern of cost, escalations. I think with annual testing, actually what you do, you achieve a regimented approach to it, but at the same time you limit the costs if you want to limit costs.
Thank you. So you've heard that, but there will be some comments. Councillor Hunt.
I'm going to speak against that because if you look at page 27, the fourth one down, it spells out the Building Act, requires non-residential buildings to have an annual renewable building WAF, ensures that specified systems installed within the building, including backflow prevention devices, are performing as they should, and it calls upon the building code for minimum compliance standards for backflow. We're already doing a building WAF. We're going to these buildings. This has come through because there was a natural issue with Havelock North. This is part of our responsibility under our risk management. We have been saying we have been flying in the dark. This is going to help us understand who's got it, what their risk is, and we'll get reports annually if anything pops up. And we know with installing equipment that there's always a bad apple in the bunch, that something just malfunctions. And it's that we may have 100 that perform perfectly, but there may be one that's actually got some compliance. We ideally will pick that up on an annual check. To not do so is actually not fulfilling our obligations as an agency. So I fully support. I don't support the amendment as.
Thank you, Your Worship.
To speak against the amendment, look, we have our engineer is our expert, who's put a report in front of us backed up by the Health Act and the relevant sections in the Building Act. We can't ignore this. And if we ignore it, we're just saying we don't need the expertise of our chief engineer. I don't accept that as acceptable at all. Also, for the record, I'm the national patron of the Guillain-Barré Society, and the avoided health costs from testing regimes are simply phenomenal to this country. And I could not accept that we just remove and just say we're happy with the word testing. We have to have learnt from the example, and it may have been source, but it's everything that we do to ensure that we've got an integral network of water supply that is safe drinking water for our community. And it's wrong of us to decide as politicians, is our expert right or not? We have heard from him that we'll have a report back, but that you must have at least annual testing in there. I can't live with less than that. I will not accept that amendment.
Sorry, Madam, right of reply.
Beg your pardon. Thank you, Councillor Kent.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me make one thing clear. No amount of testing is going to save one single device from failing. They either fail or they work. It's an on or an off scenario. There is no in between, except on the more expensive $4,000, $10,000 devices. The normal devices, all the smaller ones, are they either worked or they've failed. If you test them annually, it may have failed 11 months ago. You're not going to achieve a single thing, other than you know that one's failed and it needs changing. So, quite honestly, it may be more economical to just change them on a regular basis. You'd probably actually save more failures that way. But the issue here is, if you insist on annual testing, you're saying it must be done annually. Now, some of the more complex ones probably need testing more frequently than that. The dead simple ones certainly don't need testing annually. And I actually find that quite laughable that anyone thinks that they should require testing annually, because of the nature of the device and the method of manufacture and the components that they're made of and how they work. As I say, basically, to insist that everything is tested annually is going to cost us another staff member, probably totally needlessly, and going to achieve absolutely nothing other than picking up maybe 3 or 4 a year that might have failed. In retrospect, you won't pick them up in advance because you can't. They have either already failed, in which case they need replacing, or they work. So annual inspection is going to achieve nothing at all. Just change them every 3 or 4 years, if that is their life expectancy. It's going to be cheaper, quicker, and safer on this system. The amendment I've suggested of just taking out annual gives staff the flexibility to test as necessary. And it is up to them to then look at the standard of device that's being fitted, the calibre of device, how good or bad it is, what brand it is, and so on, and determine based on that the frequency of testing that is required, and not needlessly test a $5 device. Because it's be quicker to change that $5 device every year than go try and test it. That's all I can say.
Thank you, Councillor Kent. Now, I am going to put that amendment. It's been moved by Councillor Kent, seconded by Councillor Sturt, an amendment to point 3, that the word annual be removed. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Against? I think I'm going to have a show of hands. Yeah. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Thank you. The motion is lost. Thank you. Yes, so we're up. Yes, thank you. I am going to put now motions 2 and 3. Thank you. It's been moved by Councillor Gould, seconded by Councillor Donaldson, and we have had some good discussion. So I'll read them from up there on the screen. 2, that the committee recommends to Council that the proposed boundary backflow into the main water supply network prevention policy be adopted. That's 2. 3, that the committee note that the installation of each backflow preventer be paid for directly by the property owner, with the cost of annual testing being funded through targeted rates for connections requiring backflow prevention devices, and that funding for preliminary investigation and ongoing monitoring will be funded by existing budgets, while the cost of installation will be incorporated into the 2019-20 financial year through the user pays principle. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary? Thank you. Thank you. Get that done. Thank you. So that's carried. Thank you very much. Got those? Was that you two? Mrs. Trumper? Thank you. Right. So we move now to item number 6, and the resolution to exclude the public. Thank you, councillors, and thank you, Councillor Kent. It's moved, Councillor Stewart, seconded by Councillor Kent. And we need to go into the public excluded so that we can adopt the confidential minutes of the previous meeting and to consider a confidential report regarding a proposed rating sale. So that's all. The reasons for that is to protect information, where the making available of the information would likely, unreasonably to prejudice the commercial position of the person, and to enable any local authority holding the information to carry on without prejudice or disadvantage negotiations, and to protect the privacy of natural persons. So we have got a mover and a seconder, that the committee move into public excluded. All those in favour, please say aye. Contrary, thank you.